now love to welcome on stage our incredible panelists. I will start with Ngozi Okaro, who has come the long way from New York. Please welcome Ngozi Okaro. Oh, and the mic, so we can amplify your voice. Ngozi is a director of New York-based Custom Collaborative, which runs entrepreneurship and workforce development programs for women from low-income and immigrant communities to establish sustainable careers in fashion. Now, Beata, please welcome on stage. Beata Wilczek is a founder of Unfolding Strategies, head of impact at the Dematerialised, educator and advocate for digital transformation. And we have with us online Rachel Arthur, advocacy leads of sustainable fashion at United Nations Environment Programme, as well as business journalist and storyteller. Welcome, Rachel. We were also supposed to be joined, and this might still happen, there's some work in progress, by Sinead Bovell, who is a tech entrepreneur, futurist, and founder of WAYE, a tech education company. Sinead is calling from New York, and I think there might have been some, it's 5 a.m. in the morning in New York, and maybe there was a little miscommunication. So if she reappears in the midst of a panel, please excuse the slight change of plan. And if anything, I will bring up some of her case because she does a fascinating research on the ethics of avatars and robot cultural appropriation. Let's dive right into it. Perfect. Ngozi, so I thought I would actually start from you and ask you, how important is it to increase access to opportunities in the fashion industry and make sustainability more mainstream? I mean, so much of sustainability that we talk about is connected to luxurious, high-end, unattainable brands. And so much of the ways that we talk about is connected to fast fashion. But, let's not kid ourselves. Price tag is important. Every report shows that people make a decision based on the price. And I love what you're doing by championing women to start careers in fashion, but start them in a sustainable manner. Can you talk a little bit more about the work of your organization?
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. This is actually my first time in Warsaw, in Poland overall, so I'm super excited to be here and share what we're doing in New York. Custom Collaborative, as you said, supports low and no income and immigrant women who are creating careers in sustainable fashion. In fact, these earrings that I'm wearing were made by one of the designers who we've incubated. She found some spare bits of leather and some old beads and made these earrings. And so really this is as sustainable as possible, especially considering I plan to wear them for the next however many decades. I think that as we talk about sustainability, the whole point is to keep the planet habitable for people and plants and animals. And in the process of doing so, I think we need to include the people who are already here. And so most of us in this room are wearing clothes that are made by women. Women are 80% of the garment workers in the world. And so it's really important, in my view, to center the work that they're doing and their conditions, whether it's forced labor or substandard wages, or even working with hazardous chemicals that are in some of the textiles. It's really very important to center them and their experience, but also to recognize the value that women bring to clothing. Like the people who are the designers and the makers are mostly women, and the people who mostly make the profit and don't bring as much of the creative value are not necessarily women. And so we really want to turn that on its head and make sure that women are the central part of the value chain and receive what they are due from the goods and services that they provide.
Yeah, because the pandemic has highlighted some of the extreme difficulties faced by garment workers around the world, and it only reinforces the urgency that people who make our clothes are paid a fair wage and have safe working conditions. And I would love to now turn to Rachel and ask you about some of the regulations that are put in place, but also where are we at with legal protection? Because, you know, we're talking about mighty ideas, but, you know, no ideas were turned into action unless we have policies and regulations enforcing these.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and it's wonderful to be here. I'm not an expert in regulation, but one thing I will say is that you know, looking at this space from a sort of systems change perspective, which is where I sit in all of this, we're in a world where we are absolutely relying on the industry to mark its own homework almost entirely, and that goes for whether we're talking about environmental or social issues. You know, targets are great, and obviously we're seeing more and more of them coming from across the sector, but if we don't see enforcement on the one hand, or indeed incentive on the other, I just don't think we're going to get there in the time frame that's ahead of us. So we need a huge focus on policy that absolutely has to underpin systemic change. And things are moving in the right direction. There is more and more, certainly in the past of 12 months, we're starting to hear of more policy that is being put forward and recommended in different markets around the world. By no means are we in a place where that is yet at all strong enough. But certainly in the EU, we see a lot coming down the pipeline. And in the US, there are things beginning to bubble, which is extremely promising. And hopefully we will see some of that actually come through. From my side on the focus, I really focus on narrative change, which I know we'll talk about in a little bit. But you know, even in that space, the role of policy is enormous, and it has to be. You know, part of that is about greenwashing, which I know was touched on earlier this morning. But it's much wider than that. You know, the role of policymakers really does need to exist there to bend the curve on unsustainable fashion consumption. That's a very wide focus of what is possible in this space. And I think with the policies that are added or removed, they can really help change social norms. And that's the kind of place that we're in right now, what we're trying to explore. And by that, I mean everything from indeed enforcing that living wage really does become a reality, all the way through to how we regulate fashion advertising and the expectation that we have there around what is indeed desirable or aspirational. And within all of that is incentivizing businesses as well to switch to circular business models, which again was talked about earlier. So I think there's a lot coming. I know that my colleague Bettina talked earlier about the sort of unintended consequences and trade-offs that come in this space. And I think one thing that we are really missing within all of this, and I know that there are some efforts from different groups to try and address, is the way that policy gets coordinated internationally, and just ensuring that anything that's being put forward, the consequences are also considered in other markets around the world, so that we do ensure that whatever we end up doing, that we establish a just transition along the way as well.
You know, I mean, like we're really entering an uncharted territory when we're talking about the metaverse, when we're talking about the digital transformation, and the notion is what can we do to ensure that we don't replicate the harmful policies and also discrimination that's rampant in the sort of traditional fashion realm. And we have here with us Beata Wilczek, who is the founder of the consultancy agency Unfolding Strategies that aims to rethink ethical fashion also in that digital realm. I would love to hear more from you. What is it that you do within your work, but you also work as an educator?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me and having me here. It's a pleasure to speak to all of you. I started Unfolding Strategies amidst the pandemic at the early beginning, because I felt that what I've been doing in academia, where I actually came from working in fashion industry and art world, kind of runs its course. Because we were having many fascinating conversations, predominantly in programs and courses around sustainable fashion, how to do things differently, maybe a little bit outside of the UN's kind of ways how to do sustainability in fashion industry. We were talking about decolonization. We were also thinking about digitization. So I felt this is a momentum when maybe actually the industry needs this knowledge. And I'm kind of reviving this second time in my life, because first when I was started working with sustainability as educator maybe 10, 11 years ago, everybody I knew who work in fashion industry or luxury or high street were saying, this is so nice, this is so sweet of you, this is so romantic, this is so naive. But yet we are here and the word environment, is next to business. So somehow, many jobs were created, we discussed that before. Mm-hmm. But the moment when everything shifts towards more digital, and that means digitization and introducing different technologies into the making, consuming, and experiencing fashion, but also creating new digital products, it's getting more and more complicated. So with digital fashion, and we will hear more about it today from really excellent speakers, but with digital fashion, what is interesting that there's a lot of hope, a lot of promises, but also a lot of fear. So somewhere, and that's usually what happens when there are new things and new technologies coming, but somewhere in the middle, we need to think, is it really a sustainable savior, or is it really something that tries to distance us from our lives, and it's horrible and has a very, very high environmental footprint because it's NFTs. So many of those statements, I think, are a little bit misleading, but these are very important conversations to have, because now we have a unique opportunity to start this new branch of fashion that will affect all of it with different ideas, with different values. It can be a different start. So if we start setting it from an ethical standpoint, if we start thinking about it in a different way, we don't later will have to fix it like we see it now with fashion. We won't have to decarbonize it. We won't have to decolonize it, because it can be implemented from beginning. Obviously, that's easily said. It's hard to do. But I think it's very, very important that we try. With Unfolding Strategies, what we do right now is that we focus on helping to understand those things. So even explaining what is the metaverse, what is Web3, and how is it even connected to, I don't know, sustainability, carbon footprints, racism, what is the link and connection? Because with all this hype and newness and glossiness, we tend to not see that. So first we need to understand. So we're doing a lot of training, we're doing workshops. We do it mainly for companies and institutions, but we're now going to be launching online courses for anyone who wants to do it. So we don't have to, we have a bigger reach basically. And then we also support different projects, strategies, creation of new products. We are supporting strategy of different startups. So this is what we do. Also, sorry, forgot to say, we also support big fashion brands in navigating those territories. So I think it's very important, and I think it's an exciting opportunity, because instead of fixing, we can start doing something in a more ethical way, however we understand it, from a very, very beginning. So that's very valuable. And yeah, I think also what I wanted to just add about labor is also very, very important when we talk about digital fashion, because today we mainly talk about environmental sustainability, but cultural sustainability, social sustainability, these are topics that are just, behind the corner. So we also need to start addressing them, and this is going to happen very, very soon.
And maybe now be a little bit the voice of Sinead, which is really overwhelming to step into her shoes, because what she does is huge. But there's something that this link that she's made between fair representation and the abuse, well, also, the abuse of labor, because she talks about the ethics of avatars. And we have more and more cases of, there's this South African AI-generated model called Shudugram, as well as a fictional rapper, FN Mecca, who are both designed by non-Black creators, but who, by themselves, kind of tick the box of inclusivity by brands who use them and hire them. So it's also, asking these larger questions. Who is speaking on behalf and profiting of communities that they aren't a part of? So I think this is also fascinating, kind of going back to Rachel, when we talk about the storytelling connecting to sustainability is, who is speaking of sustainability? I mean, whose stories are we highlighting? I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do around storytelling? Rachel?
I think
I
there's
think
a
that
little bit
you're
of a delay.
back. Amazing. I think that you were just
Great.
muted. Perfect, perfect. Yes.
I think we almost have to pause for a moment and think about what do we even mean when we say stories. Um, in many ways, stories are everything to do with our entire world, right? So, sorry, I'm going to ask the tech team if they can mute myself again because there's such an echo, I can't hear myself. Wonderful, thank you very much. So stories are the underpinning of our world, right? And it's such a massive thing to say, and it's such a simple thing to say, but it's such an important one to sort of recognize. So everything we know about fashion and how it works today, what we expect as consumers, how we behave, is the result of the stories that we've been told, and that many of you in the room have indeed helped to shape and create over the past number of decades. So if you think about what does fashion, that narrative, look like today? It is the idea that things are disposable, that we don't wear the same thing twice, that it's our democratic right to pay a cheap amount for it. And I literally mean that in terms of a democratic right. We celebrate the idea that there's a rising middle class when we see new fashion brands landing in that city. That idea that we've got somewhere we now can afford to buy this cheap fashion. And indeed, the idea that things are extractive or exploitative in order to give us all of those things. These are really important cultural factors that influence in a very powerful way. And they're our reality, but they're all based on a generation of stories. And actually, there's much bigger work in this beyond fashion, but looking at the role of narrative in terms of the climate emergency. There's a fantastic platform called Stories for Life, and it looks at how everything to do with the climate crisis is essentially an economic design issue shaped by the stories that we as a society primarily live with. So this includes ideas such as that productivity alone is success. So the idea of more and more is better and better, and that nature is our slave. So we're allowed to continuously take from it, and indeed from the people that surround that. And both of those things ring very, very true for fashion. So the idea is that if we can change the story, we can change the narrative, and we can change that reality and indeed that future in which we all encompass, which is why we need those people involved in this whole transition that we're talking about today, both environmental and social factors, to help, those involved with the storytelling to help with that. So it's the people that write them, that create them, that shape them, that promote them, and also who importantly now need to start thinking about how we change them. So our work from a sort of storytelling standpoint is looking at the role of the communicator within this focus on sustainability. And by that, I mean everybody from somebody who indeed works within communication within a brand or an agency, those are in marketing or social media, PR, etc. The media, the journalists, the influencers, even the creative directors. The role that creative director has within a brand is really about setting a vision. It is about storytelling. And indeed all of the image makers that surround that, so the stylists, the photographers, you name it. And a big piece of that then has to be, how do we redirect all of that effort accordingly? And I think we're seeing fantastic new stories coming about sustainability. For those of us who work in this space, the narrative that you're surrounding yourself with currently will be about a transition that's needed, from both sides of the coin, environmental and social. If you're fully embedded in that space, this is the echo chamber that you live in, because the reality is the stories of fashion today, otherwise, when you look outside of that remit, really are still very, very broadly about injustice. They are about exploitation. They are about extraction. They are about the idea that we can buy things as quickly as possible and dispose of them just as fast out the other side. And that's the narrative that we need to think about changing. And if you look at who's actually powerful in that space, the number one communicator that we sort of have honed in on initially as a sort of primary piece of work is indeed the role of the brands themselves, because of just how much power they have to really set cultural norms and expectations for the way that we consume and enjoy fashion. So happily talk a bit more about the work that we're doing, but that was essentially our starting place, is looking at the importance of narrative and how we as a fashion industry have a responsibility to help change it and shift it towards a sort of a new version, a new vision of what a future, positive future, could look like.
Inspiring, and it instantly made me think of like the women that we could highlight and the work that they do and what you do, Ngozi, because you really empower marginalized communities who normally don't have a voice and don't get to sit at such panels, you know, in such environments. And I was wondering if you could share with us some of the inspiring stories of your alumni. I know there's also a project coming up, if you happen to be in New York soon, if you could shed some light on that.
Sure. I am hearing a few things that I just want to comment on. And one that we just heard about stories, right? So there are these stories that we have about fashion, but the fashion companies created these stories like 30, maybe 30 years ago. Like it wasn't always the way that you would buy clothes and wear them up to 8 times and then throw them away. And so I'm just thinking, yes, we can create new stories, but what we can also do is share the reality of how clothing is created. What is the history of fashion so people can more understand how this expression of ourselves, right? Because fashion is the first way that we tell the world who we are, that how this expression of ourselves has historically been created in what it means, right? And so it means something to me when I wear my grandmother's dress that was 60 years old, right? It obviously means something to me when I wear these earrings that Irma created because I told you the story about them. So it's I think, as much coming to terms with what is the real reality, like what is the impact of the current fashion system on the universe, on the planet, and what we can do to change that, but also still look good and feel comfortable about ourselves and in our clothes. And I so much relate to the story this morning about like being a tall woman and not having clothes that fit, and like how much better I felt when I was able to wear something that fit me and suited me. So the women in our programs come from to the U.S. from about 25 different countries. And one woman who stands out to me, Jasminia, who originally came from Angola, when she came to me one day after our sustainability lesson, because we have a 15-week program where we teach women to design, sew, and sell sustainable fashion so they can become entrepreneurs. She came to me and she said, oh, you know, I never understood this sustainability. We have it in Angola, but we just don't call it that. This is just what we do. This is the normal way of being. And so when I hear words like sustainability and circularity, obviously I understand what they mean, but I wonder if we are excluding people and excluding indigenous and native and normal practices by putting these special words to the types of systems that we're trying to create.
'Cause it's a form of like, you know, like gatekeeping in some way, you know, like we kind of, you know, we just box it up in these academic terms, and then we believe that we're the ones passing the knowledge of, you know, sustainability to others. Like, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt,
no, but that's exactly right.
Up.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I think that's exactly right. That's the conversation, right? So how do we make this, how do we normalize this and keep it outside of like the ivory tower, like you're saying, like keep it out of academia and make it a part of our normal lives. And so I think that that's where we're trying to go. In terms of the project that we're working on, I feel like I'm regularly working on projects. I'm a bit of an innovator. A few things that we've done really since the pandemic is start an apprenticeship program. We did a pilot with Mara Hoffman and the United Nations Office of Partnerships, Slow Factory Swarovski, and some others, and developed a program where we could figure out how to advance skills of women in workplaces so they could have more opportunity to earn money and to gain skills. And so many of the businesses who are saying that the people who know how to do these techniques are aging out and retiring so they could actually replenish their skilled labor market. And we'll do a project in the fall with the photographer Camila Falquez and highlight the work of 10 or 12 of our resident designers at Custom Collaborative. And I'm really proud to be able to help put these women in the spotlight that they should naturally have, because they have talents and skills and abilities. They just have not had the same advantages as some of us who appear on these stages.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That sounds great. It's a tough one. Yeah, I want to. I wish I could. Speaking of projects that are relevant to storytelling and narratives, and also working with communities, maybe this would be a great opportunity to share two projects. One we just launched with Dematerialised, where I serve as a head of impact. It's a digital fashion marketplace. And one of the projects, it's something close to the passport that we heard about today, this morning at Better. We created real transparency standard for digital fashion, focusing on labor, which is basically a bit of data in the product description that says who made this digital asset, where was it created, what was the time, what is the carbon footprint. We have one more, but I forgot now. What blockchain is it on, obviously, but there's one more. So we provide this data to kind of be transparent and deliver on the transparency of the product, which in that case is a fashion NFT. But on the other hand, it also makes it more tangible. And it also mitigates the risk of issues with lack of labor transparency. And some creators said to me, but we don't have that problem in tech. There's a massive problem in tech with labor transparency as well. If you take fashion standards and practices with tech, this is becoming a bit problematic. And the second project we've been working now for 10 months, it's a quite unique partnership. We launched at Dematerialised with a school called CEDIM. It's a design university in Monterrey in Mexico. And with them, we thought of creating, and this is like a team of 15 interdisciplinary students working on a massive project, which is basically focusing on how to bring cultural sustainability and indigenous knowledge to metaverse. So we all seen how digital fashion looks like. It's fantastic, it's creative, it's on fire, it's bubbles, it's everything. But what if we also use it to, preserve heritage? Think about all the vintage collections, and this is happening now, being digitized in that way. There are certain projects doing it well. But what if we also start introducing and inviting the indigenous people, the different communities that are still a little bit erased from those conversations and narratives. So it was very interesting to support this group of interdisciplinary students in doing that. And they work with a local community, co-creating with them, listening to them, not getting inspired, not co-opting what they do. So I think there's a great potential in also making initiatives and projects like that.
Rachel, would you like to add something to that? Speak on the projects that you're working on, or in what ways does it connect with the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, actually, just one thing to build on what Beata said is that I think the idea of the metaverse is so exciting to think around a place that we could fully embrace this idea of a new narrative, because one of the biggest challenges I think within all of it is that we're expecting people to change, but we're not providing them a vision for what that future could look like. We know that we need to embrace ideas such as quality, longevity, equity, new value sets, regeneration, indeed massively that piece around these wider community sets of the world that have been such a sort of foundation of fashion and what it's about, and their stories. And being able to place them somewhere and showing how that vision can be a reality is a huge challenge that I think we had ahead of us, but also a massive opportunity. So I'm incredibly excited about the opportunity that the metaverse presents within all of that. And then bringing it back to the work that we're doing, Zuzanna, to answer your question, one of the things we recognize with this work is indeed if we are asking people to change the way that they communicate, we need to present a guideline for how to actually go about doing so. So we did a couple of things over the past couple of years. One of the sort of core components of this is that the UN Environment Programme where I work and the UNFCCC, which is focused on climate and has, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action. We teamed up together and we spent a long time working on different consultations with the industry to really understand this role of communication and the part that it needs to play, within that sort of set of wider sustainability targets. The outcome from that we announced during COP26 last year in November, which was that indeed we had added a commitment to communication to the Fashion Charter. So anybody that is now a signatory, of which there are about 160 organisations, also now has committed to, and the phrase is aligning all communication to the 1.5 degree pathway of the Paris Agreement, and indeed to wider sustainability targets, ensuring a just and equitable future. So that was a fantastic sort of starting point for this work, to sort of show the importance of it, demonstrate that we are taking communication and this whole idea of narrative very seriously within the space. And then what we've been working on since is a guide or a playbook, if you will, which is presenting exactly how communicators can go about that. And the one thing I just wanted to say briefly was that we sort of see this world, I see this world sort of split into two in its sort of simplest sense. It's obviously much more nuanced than that. But on the one side, we have the how in a very tangible, logical sense can you go about ensuring that you do not greenwash with what it is you're putting out in your communication. And that is a place that I think the majority of the industry are focused right now. We sort of have a very good understanding of what that looks like. There's more regulation coming down the line. There is indeed some very strong other guidance in different markets around how to do so. There's more indeed legal cases coming forward to try and stop businesses from doing so. So that's all really strong. That's the sort of information-based layer, if you will, that we're seeing in sustainability. The second side of it, and the place where I think this huge opportunity lies, is around the role of culture. And this is the piece where the fashion industry needs to start embracing the opportunity that it has to reshape culture. And that is, as I was talking about earlier, due to the huge influence the industry has. But specifically focus on what is it indeed that we look at when we say that we make something aspirational or desirable, and how do we reshape or redirect what it is that we even consider to be a version of status or success. There was a lot of talk earlier around the idea of consumption and that we don't necessarily need to reduce it, but we need to change it. I would argue we definitely need to change it. I would say we also need to reduce it. And so one of the things that we're looking at in this guide is what role does communication play within that to redirect those efforts. Do we need material wealth to be such a symbol of status and success? And if it isn't, as it currently is, if it isn't, what does another version of that look like? And that's where this vision piece really has to live. So in the playbook, we talk a lot around the ideas of changing behavior and practices of consumers, so that indeed redirecting efforts towards circular practices instead. And we also look at this idea of reimagining values, so looking instead at that piece around aspiration, around desire. And a big part of that within there, circling back to what the other ladies have been talking about this morning, is around spotlighting new role models and sort of versions of success, as I talked about, but also really heavily looking at the idea of celebrating the ecological, cultural and social values of the industry, and really focusing on that idea of inclusive marketing and storytelling to encourage a more equitable industry. So what we're doing is, within this playbook, is those are quite lofty statements, if you will. So what we've been doing is then saying, okay, how do we make this very practical and usable for the communicator to say, what is it that I need to do to ensure that I start hitting some of these I don't like using the word targets because we've got enough of those, but start hitting some of these intentions. And so we break it down in a very clear outline of you should be doing this and you shouldn't be doing this. So do's and don'ts, and a checklist that basically says at the end of the day, am I doing each of these things individually? We're not expecting a communicator to be able to tick every single box with every single piece of communication that goes out there, but indeed starting to push in that direction is the effort. So that's an ongoing piece of work, but hopefully it will come out in 2023.
And we will actually have a session on do's and don'ts in the afternoon, and the kind of checklist and a bit of a guidebook for what can we do and how can we communicate things in a more transparent manner by Lucy, who I'm looking at right here from from Futera. Amazing. Rachel, I'm so sorry. I hear the flashing red lights that says time's over, get off stage. So I would love to, I feel right at home discussing social justice and empowering communities, and I hope we can take this conversation later on. And thank you. I feel incredibly inspired, and I feel like we're in good hands, building, striving towards that future that works for everyone. Thank you so much, Ngozi, Beata, Rachel, with us online.